Happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to Instagram Live. Today's topic is midlife and fatherhood. Just like the topic says, it's what no one talks about, and today we're going to be talking all about it. I'm excited to have on Dr. Magen. He was recently on the Baby Steps Nutrition podcast. He has a wealth of knowledge and insight, and I'm excited to talk to him. Good morning. We made it work, right?
We made it. I'm sorry. That was awful, but here we
No,
are.
that's okay. But this is what I was saying. The podcast is easy because there is no live, but anything can happen with a live. And so I've learned to just be patient and flexible, but it's never a dull moment. So thank
Right.
you
Now
for
we're
your
just
flexibility.
waiting for the earthquake, the lightning, we'll see what happens.
I mean, anything's possible. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
I know we haven't seen each other yet, so this is great. And this is a topic, as you know, I've done a lot of conversation with people about women's health, but often men's health is not one that's talked about. So tell us about why this is a topic, an area of passion of yours. Why should we be talking about it more?
Well, roughly half the people in the world are men. Uh, well, male, I guess. Some are kids too.
Hmm.
Um, and everybody's experience counts. And I've had a lot of, some 40 some years of experience life as a man. And I've gone through some tough times personally, and I am very clear that I really only got through them because of support and help and education that I received. It can just be tough. Everybody deserves support, to be clear. I don't think that men need or deserve more support than women, but men tend to use support less than women. And I think anything we can do to give tools and resources for everybody to feel good, that's better.
Yeah. And something we talked about on the podcast is often people hear the term midlife and they automatically think crisis, like this life changing, you know, it's not even going beyond your comfort zone, but like, who is this person? This
Right.
person just completely does it to be 60. But I think now with a lot of awareness and tools, like you said, there's midlife clarity. So can you talk to us of what you're seeing with the men that you've worked with and sort of trends over time and where are we headed with all this knowledge?
Yeah, I think midlife clarity is something that you said, and something that I intend to use as much as I can at this point. Yeah, I think things that don't fit well with us, things that don't fit with our lives, are not sustainable, and we can carry them through force of will or external pressure, or what have you, for some time. A, a job that is absolutely a poor fit, a relationship that is a poor fit, a lifestyle that is unhealthy. We can only do it for so long before things start to break.
Mhm.
And I think they end up breaking around what we would call midlife. And this is a moment when a lot of people wake up and say, this is really not working for me. And I don't want to spend the rest of my time doing this thing that's not working for me. And it can come from either directions. A lot of divorces and separations, which is something that I focus on a lot, are initiated by women who may well have the exact same experience. Like, this is really not working for me, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm done. And
Mhm.
everybody needs to figure out what happens next, what they do next. And this is often where I meet people at this part of the story.
Yeah. And then a lot of that is tied to identity, right? So we're younger, we're just living life, we're going through the motions. But if you've had the time to reflect and work and self-awareness and a lot of people healing and whatnot, you realize your identity and who you are at your core, separate from all the roles that you play in society. And I think that's one of the midlife clarity that tends to happen for a lot of people. And then you start asking those questions of, is this life suitable for me? And are these decisions that I've made to date really fit who I am at my core? So talk to us about men and identity and what tends to happen in midlife when you start asking those questions.
you know, I I generally think that moving through life in general, when we're young, when we're in the middle, when we're old, we can sort of grow better or grow, we can fade.
Mhm.
When the outside, when the shell, when the persona is all we have and it takes over and all we do is because of external demands and obligations and whatnot, our core shrinks. We end up being more and more the crust. The crust is what operates us. Um, and and it takes a lot of work to chip away at that crust and say, no, I want to be me showing through. I want to have as little crust as I can around me and be driven by what's important to me. I think everybody receives pretty clear messages growing up and then living life from society about what they should be and how they should be. For men, there's often the stereotypical, be financially.
Mhm.
I
The
want to avoid the word successful,
breadwinner.
right? But
Yeah, very
that's
traditional term, right? The
that's in a
breadwinner.
family context. But like, how do you know that you've lived a successful life? And a lot of people, I think, just look at external
Mhm.
markers, right? Oh, if I make a lot of money, if my body looks a certain way, if people treat me a certain way,
Mhm.
um, if my house looks a certain way, if I have a certain car, whatever it is, it's these external markers. And a lot of people along the way just sort of stop asking, if I feel a certain, like, how do I want to feel? What would be success for me? What would feel good for me? And again, that's the part that becomes unsustainable at some point in life. You realize like you're really not feeling good. And then what do you
Mhm.
do about it? Do you turn to substances, to relationships that are not healthy? Do you do weird things with food? Do you self-medicate? Like how do you do it? Or get somebody else to prescribe medication for you to deal with your life, basically.
Mhm.
Uh, so you were asking originally about the kind of messaging. I think here in this country, um, a lot of the messaging is rely on external markers of success.
Yeah.
Get famous, get rich, get powerful, get popular. And there's very little conversation and very little education as we're growing up
Mhm.
around what makes us feel good, what is actually wholesome and nourishing for the part of us on the inside, not the shell that is the persona.
Mhm. So then how should men, this is a big question, so I don't know if it's easy to answer, but so much to silence the noise enough where you can tap into your authentic self. Because we know the noise will always be there,
Yeah.
right? And so it's not something that you can completely, unless you isolate yourself on some island, but still the noise will be there because it's in your head. But how can men do that so they can tap more into what feels right for them and who they really are?
I don't know if it's about silencing the noise so much. I think it's about picking the right noise. I
Mm,
think you want to pick the right community mostly, right? You want to be around people that make you feel good, that make you feel more alive, more engaged, either better about your life or
mhm.
more motivated to change your life in a direction that feels good. I think that the choice of community is critical. I heard this is kind of an unverified, non scientific thing, but I really love this idea that we are like an average of the 5 people we spend the most time with.
I've
I
heard
see
that.
this
Mhm.
in my life, right? When I spend more time with one person, like my way of speaking changes, my way of thinking starts to change. And I think we want to pick our community very carefully and very intentionally. So, yeah, not so much about silencing the noise, but more about replacing it with the right kind of noise. So, get the right kind of influences in,
Mhm.
but then also have space to process. Because for most of us, it's hard to just sit down and think for 2 hours
Mhm.
or for an hour or for 30 minutes. Like, pretty quickly, we want to do something else. But if we have somebody attentive and interested and skillful listening to us, we can process for a long time and figure out all kinds of stuff. So this can be a good friend or a series of good friends or family, or it can be a therapist, or it can be a formal support group, or it can be a
Mhm.
faith leader, or it can be whoever, but creating spaces to process and to not be afraid of asking this important question, coming in and saying, I want to think about my life and like how it's going right now. What am I feeling good about? How good am I feeling in my life at all?
Mhm.
Like, is this going great? Is the signal just continue as you are? Is this going not so great? Do I want to change? So find people that you can talk with and process with. If it's hard for you to find those people, start working toward finding them. But in the meantime, talk to other people, right? You can talk to a therapist. You can find lots of good influences on Instagram on YouTube. You can start somewhere, get the voices you want to get
Mhm.
inside your head and start processing through that. For most of us, I think it's very hard to sit down, like think about it for a very long time. So thinking with other people is the obvious alternative.
Yeah, and I love that. And something that you had talked about, which is how I found you and I wanted to connect with you, is you talked about fears that men often have. Tell us about what those are, because as women, we want to hear, right? What are men thinking when they're not saying it out loud?
Well, they're probably thinking inappropriate thoughts when they're not saying it out loud. But the other thing that they're thinking about, in terms of fear, I mean, it's not achieving these external markers of success. And well, it's not exactly true. The external markers, one theory that I really like and makes a lot of sense to me is that what all humans seek is safety.
Yes,
And
that's a non-negotiable, in my opinion. It
and in
has to be
order,
there before everything else.
yeah, and we're all so oriented toward it, but to achieve it, we do all these other things, and it's sometimes easy to lose sight that these things are there because they're contributing to a sense of safety. So, for example, a very strong um, element of safety is predictability. Just
Hmm.
knowing what's going to happen is brings a big sense comfort to people,
Hmm.
and even a higher form of bringing safety or sense of safety to myself is not just predicting what's going to happen, but controlling what's going to happen.
Hmm.
And to control what's going to happen in general, that's power, right? In an
Yes.
abstract sense, that's power. And as I see it, all of these external markers of success that so many of us are trained to pursue are different forms of creating power so that we can control the whole world, so that we can be safe. If I have a lot of money, I can tell people what to do, and I can get all the healthcare that I need, and I can buy all the stuff that I want, and I'll never be alone, and I'll never be sick, and I'll never have a problem, and I'll be safe. If I'm super popular, same stuff. If I'm super famous, same stuff. So it's all leading toward power. So what is the fear? I mean, I don't know if it's always a conscious fear, but I think underneath it is always the fear of not having power
Hmm.
and the belief that we must have power to feel safe, and that we must feel safe in order to feel happy and
Hmm.
content.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of a deep dive, I guess. But the short answer to your question, what are men afraid of? I think it's to be powerless,
And lose control, right?
right?
Yeah. And so for men who, so the power and control is a facade, right? It's a, like you said, it's a protection to avoid the unknown. And so for those men who've grown up with male role models who have raised them that way, but they are now ready but scared to tap into their own emotional connection with others, what are some steps that they could take, especially if they're raising children and they want to break that cycle?
There are a few antidotes to this desire for control as a means to create safety.
Hmm.
One antidote, that's a that's a hard one, although I think it's the most effective one, is letting go of the need for safety. Just accepting the fact that things are going to happen and we don't actually control everything and
Hmm.
can't. You can be the richest, strongest, healthiest, most popular person in the world, and one day a piano just falls in your head and it's over. Like you just can't control everything.
Hmm.
But you can improve your odds for sure, right? By having more resources, which I think is the point here. But at a fundamental level, accepting the fact that we can't control everything and that at some point we reach some reasonable level of control and then we
Hmm.
stop, and that's all we need. Um, that's an antidote. This one is hard. This one takes, I think, a lot of practice, a lot of spiritual practice to come to a point of being comfortable with the fact that just bad things happen and could
Yeah.
happen and will ultimately happen to me for sure. Um, a different, maybe a stepping stone on the way there and easier to achieve is coming to recognize our own resilience in the face of challenges and difficulties. I don't have to control everything if I know that I can respond productively and effectively to most things.
Hmm.
So then it's not so horrible if I get sick. It's not so horrible if I lose my job. It's not so horrible if the relationship that I care about most ends. It's horrible, but it's not life ending. There
Hmm.
will be a new morning. I will figure it out. And I think this is a hugely important message to convey to kids often when a challenge happens, when a setback occurs, when a disappointment, uh, when we run into a disappointment, to say, right, yes, this is upsetting, and now what? And how can we make it better? And then talk about it later and debrief, right? 2 days later, when everybody's not upset, to say, do you remember how upset you were
Hmm.
when the toy fell down and it like broke in a million pieces? And what did we do then? Right? We started fixing it. Yeah, we glued it. It looks a little funny now, right? But it makes a funny noise and you kind of like it. Yeah, that's right. And reintroduce this idea of resilience so kids can grow up realizing that when bad things happen, the world doesn't end. It's just, we just deal with it and move on. I think that's a hugely important lesson, and not to constantly buffer and prevent every possible bad thing from happening. And I mean, judiciously, obviously, we don't want to risk anyone and we don't want bad things to constantly happen, but to not be afraid of bad
Hmm.
things happening because we realize that we are resilient and we are
Yep.
resourceful and,
Yeah.
and constantly um, conveying, reinforcing that message.
Yeah. And that goes back to that fear that you mentioned earlier. And so, with people that you've worked with, and if you're comfortable sharing your own personal experience of once you relinquish that power and control in order to tap into your resilience, what have you seen that's been transformative, both your clients and then personally, if you'd like to share? Because I'd imagine that's huge and that's life-changing in itself. But you have to be willing to let that go in order to get somewhere. And often people just will not let it go. They will hold on because, like you said, then they feel like they're just losing all sense of control and safety.
Yeah, I think the change can be huge and the change can be small, but everything changes when we stop clinging to safety
Mhm.
and we start reaching for the things that feel good and feel right and feel wholesome. And it's
Mhm.
this, I mean, there's now been, I guess, decades of people talking about a scarcity awareness versus an abundance awareness. And I think it's at its core exactly this idea of like, well, this is good enough and I'll just be here and it's safe and I don't want to venture out there because who knows, as opposed to saying like, I can deal with the challenges. I will venture out there and I'll get slammed often
Mhm.
and I'll get up, and I'm doing this on the path to a better place. And this can happen on a career path. This can happen on a relationship path. This can happen on a health path. Like really every at every single level. Um, yeah, like maybe a simple example I'll give from my own life is I remember when I moved to Connecticut about 5 years ago, and I'd never lived here before, and I moved here just not knowing anyone. I kind of followed my son here, and
Mhm.
because first principle for me is just be there, be present with my son, and I knew absolutely nobody,
Mhm.
and and then soon after I moved here, COVID started, and the world just like immediately ended, and it was very hard to meet even anyone. Other than delivery people, I guess, were coming in fully like, to the
Mhm.
door. And so I made it a project. I made sure that I'm going to different activities that I could go where I could meet people. And then whenever I saw anybody that looked like a potential friend, right, where there was like a sense of a connection, to really push myself to go and suggest that we spend time together. And it's exactly as terrifying as asking people out on a date. Like asking people on a friend date, terrifying because
Mhm.
that potential for a until you do it a few times and you realize everybody's so happy
Mhm.
because everybody's kind of lonely and wanting more friends, and people are just ecstatic when somebody says, do you want to hang out for some time and do something? And part of this was realizing that it's okay to feel a little bad if somebody says no thanks, right? And
Mhm.
that's a version of learning my own resilience because stopping to think about it, it's silly. I mean, obviously I'm not going to break if I say, hey, do you want to go for a hike after, or do you want, or whatever. And if somebody says, nah, I don't like hiking, or or whatever it is, we're not going to break. But it's so much easier to avoid the risk of this, in reality, pretty small discomfort,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because of not thinking about it enough in advance. But then once, yes, thinking about it and realizing, oh, it's kind of a deep fear, but it's a small risk, very small damage. Going through it, doing it a couple of times, recognizing I'm going to get smacked in the face, I might fall down, it'll be fine, I'll get up, dust myself off, keep on with my. This is, back to my point about the importance of community. Like for me, this was a major goal when I moved to this completely new place, and it took some time. But like I feel so happy with my community now, and just having people here that I'm friends with and I can rely on, and they ask me for help and I ask them for help, and we hang out, and it's fun. And it just none of this would have happened if
Yeah.
I hadn't just recognized the importance of seeking out these kinds of connections and making them happen,
Yeah.
or opening the door and inviting them to happen actively rather than kind of sitting there and hoping that, if somebody really likes me, they'll come and they'll suggest to hang out. This is a very kind of middle school problem, but the problem is that, I mean, especially for me, I work from home. I don't have like a workplace I go to where I, hang out with some random assortment of 20 people or whatnot. But that for me is a good example of just realizing, no, I'm stronger than this. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Rejection will sting, but won't kill me.
Yeah.
And it turns out very little of that anyway.
And with your own network of male friends and men that you've worked with, are you seeing that men are more facing their truth now? Do you feel hopeful for the future, or do you think we still have a long way to go?
That's a great question. I guess both. I think that there is definitely a change afoot. I think this generation is very different from the previous generation. I think the coming generation is quite different from the current generation, sort of adult slash into middle age adult uh, men. But I think there's still a long way to go. A lot of people are comfortable living what seems to me, at least, like sort of an external demand oriented life, and
Yeah.
fitting in their authentic selves in between the pieces of life they have to do, because that's just how life is done, and I think people are waking up to that more and more. um,
Hmm.
but you see it in pockets, right? Because like everything, this is driven by social network. And if you hang out with people that eat healthy, you're going to eat healthier. And if you hang out with people that exercise, you're going to exercise more. And if you hang out with people that really emphasize living a life that feels true to themselves and satisfying, you're going to start living a life that's more emphasizing being true to yourself.
Yeah.
Um, so like everything, this like almost everything, this travels through social networks as well.
Yeah, and I like that you brought it back to the five people that are closest to you really dictate how your life is. And that's so important. And I think that's one of the reflective points, like just stop and think about who are the five people that are on your call list, or the five people that you think about when you're happy or when you're sad, right? Because it's not just about the good times, it's actually who's going to be there for you when you really need them. And I certainly have really thought that more as I've gotten older. Quality over quantity.
Yeah, and
So,
who do you spend leisure time with? Like, just
yeah,
what are your passive approaches, attitudes to life that you're osmosing through this?
yeah, yeah. And if you had to, that's my friend Sarah, and she's agreeing with us, and she's actually in my network. Dr. Megan, if you could share one message for men in midlife, what would that be? All your wisdom,
One message.
or something that they could take away from here, or something a loved one can share or keep in mind when they want to support a man in their life, or your own life's philosophy, something that you wake up and
Yeah,
you remind yourself, I'm here and this is where I want to go.
the one message I would say, I would share, is it's possible for you to have a life in which you are feeling satisfied life that feels meaningful to you. Cast yourself out into the future, figure out what that life looks like, and just do one thing that looks a little bit more like that life. Just
Hmm.
one thing that's easy. Do something really easy. You want to spend more time outdoors? You want to be like a big hiker? Go on a walk once a week for 10 minutes. Like just do something really easy. And then
Hmm.
when that's so easy that you're not even thinking about it, do another thing that's really easy. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be enormous, but you can absolutely get there. And when you build up enough energy, maybe you'll make a bigger step, but it doesn't need to feel horrible. It doesn't need to feel bad. And I guess part two of that one message, intentionally pick your community to support
Yeah.
where you're going. Community is so important. This is part, you know what, I'll loop all the way back to the start of our conversation. What messages what messages men receive growing up. Part of being stoic and being strong is you don't need other people, and that is absolutely baloney. And I lived a good chunk of my life pretending to myself I don't need other people and thinking I can figure things out. And now I'm like 180 from there. Like I
Hmm.
have, it's a disciplined practice that when something
Hmm.
feels like it's a little bit jarring, I have to. There's a rule. I have to talk about it with at least one friend, even if I don't feel like I need a lot of support. Like just talk, just start processing and understand what's happening. Community is so important, and so often we're told to go it alone, to
Yeah.
figure it out, to come perfect, and it's just not how life works best.
Yeah.
So get a community that supports you in moving toward the thing you want to. You can have this life that you want to have. Baby steps.
Yes, that's, I'm all about that, of course. So small steps, but that are sustainable and that keep pushing you forward. So less likely to, develop frustration. I'm all about hope and optimism.
Amen.
So thank you so much for those words, right? Where can our viewers find out more about you?
Um, well, there's here on Instagram, Aaron Magen PhD. It's probably written somewhere. I have the website divorcingdads.org, and I have a general website on parenting, parentingforhumans.com. All of these places will work.
Yep, you do some great work. Thank you so much for being here. As I mentioned at the beginning, you were also on the latest episode of the Baby Steps Nutrition podcast, where everyone can check it out. So much great conversation. Hopefully, more to come. I know I have more questions for you. So, thank you, and I appreciate your time for being here.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who joined. If you have any questions for either of us, we are here. So, thank you. Happy Monday, and hope everyone has a great rest of the week. Bye.